class. This is your friendly neighborhood TA here, Melissa, and I just wanted to make a quick little video because I know that you have a first draft due on your narrative essay this week. And so what I wanted to do was to just give a little bit of advice on the revision process, just to hopefully help you along with getting the work done for this week. So when you have your first draft done, before you actually turn it in, I have a few recommendations to make. You don't have to follow all of these recommendations. You don't have to do all of these things. You can just take whatever works for you, but these are just some ideas in case you haven't considered this yet. So first thing that I always suggest when you're writing something that needs to be turned in, especially for a grade, is to write your first draft and then put it aside and let it sit. Depending on how much time you have, whether you let it sit for a couple of hours or a couple of days, or if you're really getting ahead of things and if you're going to let it sit for a couple of weeks, whatever works for you is fine, but just to let it be a little less familiar to you so it's not just straight from your brain onto the paper. After you've let it sit for however much time you want to, pick it back up and reread it, because at that point it should be a little bit less familiar, and maybe you'll pick up things that you didn't notice the first time when you wrote it down. Like maybe you missed a word, or maybe you doubled up a word, or maybe there's a weird typo, or maybe there's a part that you meant to mention that you forgot to mention, and you just didn't notice because it made sense in your brain, even if it didn't actually get down onto the paper. Now, after you've let it sit and done your reread that way, a couple of other things that I suggest. One thing that you can do is read your draft backwards. Now, I don't mean word by word backwards, because that wouldn't make any sense at all. But if you read it backwards, sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph, what that does is it forces your brain to actually think about what you're reading. So that way, again, you might miss things that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed. You would notice things that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed if you'd just been reading it normally. Another idea that I have, and this is something that I do frequently with my own writing, actually on a very regular basis, because this is how I notice things the best, is to read the draft out loud. And I know for me, when I'm reading something that I've written, if I'm just reading it silently, I don't really notice everything, specifically because my brain just kind of glosses over what might be some minor or even major mistakes. Whereas if I'm reading it out loud, I'm actually engaging more of my brain by reading it and also listening to myself. And so as I'm listening to myself, I might say, oh, this thing might not make sense. Or, oh, I forgot to mention this part here where I meant to put it in and I just didn't put it in there. So it's just another way to help you catch issues that you maybe didn't notice before. Another thing that you can do when you're editing and getting this draft prepared to turn it in, you can change the medium that you read it in. So by that I mean that, for example, if you typed up the draft, maybe you want to print it out so you're actually reading it on paper. Just by changing how you read it, again, that can allow you to pay a little bit more attention and notice something that you might want to fix or changes that you might want to make. Something that I do, especially for my big papers, and whether you want to do this for this first paper or not, again, it's up to you, but I like to have somebody else read my work. Now, this sounds scary, and I know for me it was very scary, especially at first when I started doing this, because my writing is very personal to me, and so it feels like I'm just opening myself up, and I'm not always feeling like I'm ready for that. But now what I've learned is that by letting other people read my work before I actually turn it in, is that they might notice something that I didn't. For example, if you're thinking of a story in your head that you want to tell, you already know the background, you know the character's motivations, you know why things are happening the way they're happening. Whereas if you have somebody else read the story that you wrote, they don't know that background. So if they read this and they say, wait a minute, I don't get how person got from here to there, you might know that, but you just didn't put it on the paper. So this is just another way to help you catch things that maybe you didn't catch the first time around. Don't be afraid to cut parts out. Don't be afraid to add things in. Don't be afraid to make changes to your work, because that's the reason this first draft is called a first draft. I don't know of anybody who writes a perfect draft the first time around. And if they do, I'd like to meet them and find out their method, because revising and editing is hard work. But that's part of the fun of the process. Finally, When you're revising and getting ready to get your paper turned in, what I always recommend is activate your brain. Just think about what you're writing. Don't be on autopilot. And that's really where you can catch the most when you're looking at your paper and getting ready to turn it in, is if you're actually thinking about it and not just skimming over it just to skim over it and not really paying attention to it. By keeping your brain active, you might notice all kinds of things, and this hopefully will help you make a good paper into a great paper. If you need any help, if you need any advice, or if you want somebody to just listen to a draft, please feel free to get in touch with me. Thanks, guys.